Hello and welcome. In this video, I'm going to be covering everything related to multiclassing in Baldurs Gate 3. While multiclassing can look a little bit difficult on the surface, once you get the gist of things, it allows for a lot of creativity and the opportunity to make some wacky fun builds, as well as some slightly overpowered ones. This video specifically is going to be divided into two different parts to help guide you into having more knowledge about where you should be allocating your resources and doing things when multiclassing. In the first part of the video, we're going to spend some time looking at all of the do's and don'ts that are just applicable to everything related in multiclassing. And then in the second part of the video, we're going to do a slight tier list of all of the different classes and subclasses to understand where their breakpoints are and how much we should invest into them, as well as what are some of the natural synergies and how they interact with each other. Hopefully by the end of this video, you will be quite informed on everything and feel confident in going out there and exploring your own multi-classes, which remember, you can respec at any time once you obtain withers in your camp for the low price of just 100 gold. However, before we get into it, a brief word from our sponsor, Bloodline, Heroes of Lithas. If you, like me, enjoy some mobile gaming on the side, specifically of the RPG gacha type, this is a game you should pay attention to. It doesn't stop at collecting tons of different champions, because you can use the air system to create over 1,000 unique hybrid champions from their parents. The game is completely free to play and available on the iOS and Android stores, and you can download it using the link in my description or scanning the QR code. The game has top-notch 3D graphics and art design, which is really important because when you create those hybrid champions, you don't only inherit the talents and traits, you also get unique visual mixtures of the champions they come from. Two of the things that I really like about the game is that it gets constant updates. Every 2 weeks, you have a new update with new content, new bloodlines, new champions to start fusing together. And the other thing I love is that it actually incentivizes you to play the late game PvP if you want to. Playing through a season in PvP will net you points that you can spend on Bloodcraft Legends, which are special, unique hybrid champions. The game also lets you change your gender and your companion so you can feel more immersed as you journey through the story, during which you will build up your own kingdom, including all of the metagaming things that come with that, like your passive incomes and new resources and all of that. So remember, you can download the game now for free on iOS or Android using the link in the description or the QR code. Using my link will get you a special starter pack valued at $20 with 1 summoning crystal, 100 diamonds, and 100,000 gold. Additionally, the first 30 players who leave their in-game account ID and username in the pinned comment of this video will get access to a free legendary female orc champion, Ugrel. She is really good, I can tell you from experience. Once again, thank you to Bloodline, Heroes of Lithas, for sponsoring this video. Okay, so multiclassing has some things that we need to be aware of before jumping into it. Firstly, the ability to actually multi-class shows up at any moment when you level up. So here I am respecing with withers. You can do this once withers is at the camp. It costs 100 gold. It's really cheap. It's not a big deal. So you can just come here and choose whatever other class you want to be. Now, if I go ahead and choose, okay, I want to be a barbarian, and then I click all of my level ups starting from a barbarian. Actually, multiclassing simply means that instead of just accepting this or doing whatever is on the sides here normally, replacing your spells or choosing your feats, you come up here to this corner, you hit add class, and now you can add an additional level of a different class. Now, the first thing to keep in mind is that each class uses a different statistic for its main source of damage. So, for example, here we have that the Druid is getting this here because it's their primary ability. My wisdom is fairly low. My strength is high and my dexterity is high, my constitution is high, but my wisdom is not that high. So I'm not going to benefit as much within the Druid skills that I use. Instead, if I went Paladin, I would get strength as my primary ability, which is very high. So this means that there are naturally combinations that, depending on your stats, are not going to be as good. The point is, if you want to get the best results when it comes to min-maxing, you need to make sure that the stats that both classes use are actually stats that you have up. Your starting stats are decided by your starting class. So the first class you pick is going to show you what stats you're going to have, and those will remain when you multi-class. The other really important thing to consider is your proficiencies, which you can see here. When you're adding a class, like in this case, you will see what you obtain by multi-classing in it as proficiencies, but not all of the things that you get by starting as that are the same as what you get by multiclassing into it. So if we go over to Rogue, you'll see I'll get Light Armor, Sleight of Hand, and Intimidation ×2, plus these things just for multiclassing in it. But let's go and do a different example. By multiclassing into a Fighter, you can see that I'll get access to Simple Weapons, Martial Weapons, Light, Medium Armor, and Shields. However, if I cancel all of this, go back here to Withers, I want to change my class. And we go over to Fighter, you'll see that Fighter, as your starting class, actually gains you Heavy Armor, Athletics, Medicine, Survival, and Intimidation. So these are the things that you won't obtain by multiclassing, but you will if you start as it. And this applies to most things. So if we go back to the Rogue, for example, you'll see that I only obtained Simple Weapons, and I also obtained Light Armor and Sleight of Hand ×2 and Intimidation ×2. I didn't get any of the other things here. When you add on that proficiencies that you get additionally don't stack, what you're really looking for is to get the best stats on the starting class that you want to use for multiple different things for your multiclassing, and that has the most valuable starting proficiencies instead of the most valuable added proficiencies. So Rogue, for example, I don't care about Simple Weapons and Light Armor, and Acrobatics, Medicine, Deception, and Intimidation are things that can be obtained in other ways. I mean, everything can, but their value is lower than some of the other things like Light, Medium, and Heavy Armor all rolled into one by picking a Fighter. Instead, when I multiclass into Rogue, I'm going to get Sleight of Hand ×2, Intimidation ×2, Light Armor, which I don't care about, but I'm going to get the Sneak Attacks, which is really important. Another comment is extra attacks, so martial classes like Barbarian, Fighter, Paladin, Ranger, College of Swords, Bard as well, and Rogue all get extra attack at level 5. Oh, and Monk, I forgot Monk. They all get extra attack, which allows them to use their action to attack once and then to use it again. You cannot multi-class and get 2 extra attacks by reaching level 5 with 2 martial classes and have 3. The only way that you can have 3 extra attacks in BG3 because of the level cap is by a Fighter. Fighters at level 11 obtain improved extra attack, which will allow you to attack 2 more times aside from your initial attack. So that requires pumping it all the way to level 11. You could multi-class the last level if you wanted to, but Fighters, if you want to go for that specific thing, multi-classing kind of becomes irrelevant. That is more or less everything that you need to know about multiclassing. So just to refresh you up one last time, make sure that you pick something that is going to mesh well with your final stats that you see here as your starting class with whatever else you're going to be multiclassing into. So you can see that Druid requires Wisdom. Okay, what else requires Wisdom? Well, but what if I wanted to be a Druid and a Ranger, which is something that I will show in the example builds? Well, you can see here that Druid is going to give me these benefits, and it's going to leave me with 14 Dexterity, which is really important because that is the Ranger's primary stat. But this is also going to leave me with 15 Wisdom, which, 17 and 14, I think it's better to have 17 and 15. So if you were going off of stats alone, you would want to start as a Ranger and then multiclass into Druid. But then you also have to keep in mind what benefits you're going to gain from your starting proficiencies versus what you would gain when multiclassing into it. Now we're going to get into the actual tier list, you could say. I'm going to run down each of the classes and talk about what advantages they have as multiclassers and what they don't. Generally speaking, while you can multiclass into 2 full casters, you give up on one of the strongest parts of being a caster, which is having access to those very high level, high damaging spells or very big impactful spells, and you're just going to use those spell slots on other things. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it or that it's bad. It's just maybe a little bit inefficient, and for me it toys with my power fantasy of, I don't get access to those crazy big spells at the end. Martial classes and half casters like the Paladin and the Ranger kind of work well with martial classes or full casters because you're going to get access to a lot of versatility even if you're lacking specialty. And it's kind of the same if you're starting at a martial class and then going into some casting so that you have some utility spells or other things available. There are some classes that are just really good overall that are really good for taking advantage of the multi-classing just to get 1 or 2 levels into it and get a ton of benefits. So let's start off with Barbarians. So how do Barbarians work? So Barbarians are generally really good. Their end game is not fantastic though. You get critical rage at level 11. Critical rage makes it so that if you are enraged, the next time you go down to 0 HP, you won't die. You'll go to 1 HP instead. But aside from that, their higher levels are not that crazy, but we'll get into that in a second. At level 2, you get Reckless Attack. With Reckless Attack, you have advantage on your attack rolls, but enemies also have on you. You always want to use Reckless Attack because your job as a Barbarian is to just knock people out as quickly as you can. Level 3 is where you make your choice of your subclass. So I'm going to fast forward into the future and just let you know that Berserkers, they top out at level 10 by getting Intimidating Presence, which lets you fear an enemy once per long rest. It's really not that amazing. Wild Hearts end up getting more aspects that you can put on the character, and depending on what you want to build, they can be really good. Wild Magic gets you Unstable Backlash at level 10, which allows you to trigger a new magic effect, replacing the current one that you have activated. So generally speaking, they're not that powerful to max out, but Berserker is really, really good early, and Wild Heart can be really good late. So Berserker is going to give you access to Frenzy, and during Frenzy, once you have it activated, you get an extra attack, which is very, very good. That is valuable on any other strength class. So if you wanted to mix Berserker into anything because you want to be able to attack more and have Reckless Attack and just be able to go absolutely ham at melee range, this is really strong. But Wild Hearts are really interesting. One of the popular builds in D&D is to go Wild Heart so that you keep getting these things here. You get extra attack, you get fast movement. So let's stick with Bearheart here, and now we're going to have Animal Aspects. So these are extra passive features that you get. In the case of the bear, you get carrying capacity, advantage on strength checks. You gain different resistances, basically. Here, your movement speed increases on water. All of these can be very valuable. So you could choose something from here. And once you do this, one of the popular builds, for example, is to then switch over and become a Druid. And that's so that you can go into Druid of the Moon, well, technically Circle of the Moon, so that you can wild shape and you will retain the passives that you have from the aspects here. This also means that it's just really good to go into Barbarian so that you can get Reckless Attack, and you could even go all the way up to Extra Attack, or to get the second passive from the Wild Hearts themselves, and you could go not necessarily into a Druid, you could go into anything else to retain those passive benefits. So that's a popular class for those benefits. So let's talk about Bards. Bards are full casters, although they do get martial stuff, specifically if you choose the College of Valor or the College of Swords. So their progression is the same as casters. A lot of the value you're getting is obtaining your different spell slots and maxing out at level 10, where you get to choose 2 spells from the Magical Secrets list. Otherwise, their subclass specific traits, they all end at 6, with Lore Bards getting additional spells from the Magical Secrets list. Valors and Blade Bards get extra attack at level 6. So the thing that really holds back Bards is that Charisma is their main stat, but you can definitely spec into a Bard. But otherwise, you're just going to be a caster. You're going to be using your casting much like any other caster, and they are generally okay. You can definitely spec into it. I think they are a good class for multi-classing. They are not the absolute craziest. They don't give you the most value starting off, but they're good. They're also just a generally fun class. I really like the College of Swords as a hybrid build. If you're looking to go into a hybrid build, they also have all of these proficiencies within them. So they get all of this stuff, which is pretty good if you're looking to multi-class. And of course, you get a fighting style, which can always be useful. If you really wanted to get one of these fighting styles from multi-classing, they are there. Clerics, just like Bards, have a lot of value on the spell slots that they get, and they max out at 10 when they all get Divine Intervention, which is a one-time use spell, and one-time use as in ever, and you call aid from your god. All of the domain-specific things max out at level 9, where you obtain their final domain spells, and these are great if you want to just leave something at level 9, if you're not interested in getting a spell that you're only going to use once, or you're not interested in those higher spell slots. Clerics are a great option to leave at level 9 or even lower if you just want to get some casting in. And of course, you have about 17 domains, so if you want to pick something specific from a domain, that's a very long list. Clerics generally good. Druids. So Druids have a huge gap between level 6 and 10, aside from obtaining a feat at level 8 like most classes, like all of them except a couple literally. Level 6 gives you Owlbear form, and then level 10 gives you improved Wild Strike, which allows you to hit more times while in wild shape, and it also gives you the Dilophosaurus wild shape. Moon Druids get their Saber-toothed Tiger wild shape at level 8, and they also get Elemental Myrmidons at level 10. Land Druids get Nature's Ward at 10, which means you can't be charmed or frightened by Elemental and Fey, and disease and poison no longer affect you. They also get their last level 5 spell selection. If you don't know, Land Druids choose a terrain type, basically, like if it's Arctic or desert, and they get spells more focused on the land that they choose, and you can choose a land and get level 5 spells in a selection when you reach level 9. Spore Druids get Spreading Spores at level 10, which is their ability that lets them throw deadly spores. Spore Druids are a little bit special. I haven't really experimented as much with multiclassing with them, but Druids are generally really good for multiclassing. Except if you're really going to go hard on wild shaping, you might lose out on some of the more specific benefits that you can get from Druids, since they are, like I said, quite unique. And if you want to lean into that playstyle, multiclassing them can be tough. So what I was saying is Circle of the Land, you can pick out from all of these different biomes, I guess you could call them, and that will give you access to these different spells. And as you level up, you get this choice again. It's just that the spells that you can choose from are stronger. So it really is that if you want to take advantage of that big gap, keeping in mind that they are casters, right? So you're not going to get access to these spells, which can be really, really strong. Or you can stop at level 6 or at any level really with Druid, depending on what you want to get from them. So they are relatively flexible. But like I said, you might miss out on those later things. So for example, if you're going Circle of the Moon, you might really want that improved Wild Strikes so that you can attack 3 times while you're in wild shape. That's really strong, same as Fighter, but a level earlier. And that is a trade-off you're going to have to make. So for example, the build earlier that I mentioned with Barbarian, where you get those passives from the animals and then you stay in a wild shape as a druid to be a really big tank, you won't have that third attack. You have to sacrifice that in exchange for being able to reach at least level 3 as a barbarian. Fighters. Some people would argue that fighters are the class that you want to multi-class the least. I think that if you start off as a fighter and you can make your stats work, getting access to heavy armor can be very valuable. But at the same time, if you're looking for that, you might as well start out as a cleric or a paladin, which also have heavy armor, but they have casting. But it is true that fighters really reach their peak at level 11 with that second extra attack. You can go absolutely wild. And specifically within fighters, battle masters get the extra superiority dice throw at level 10, which just makes their battle maneuvers hit like trucks. Eldritch Knights are a little bit different because they in themselves are kind of like a multi-class in the sense that you're getting access to magic, although as a third caster, so not really getting a lot of spell slots or a lot of spells or anything, but you get to keep the improved strike. And champions don't really get anything except additional proficiencies at level 7. So you could actually just go champion to get additional weapon proficiencies until level 3 and getting access to heavy armor and then multi-classing into something else. But fighters are just a really strong class. So unless you really want to do this because of the flavor of it, and I do have an example later that is because of the flavor, there's just a lot of value in fighters going late. And if you really want just a strong class all around, you can go a fighter battle master if you wanted to change Lae'zel, or if you don't like having Lae'zel, but you like the fantasy of being a martial knight type of class. Monks. Monks are really interesting. Monks of the Open Hand and of the elements max out at 9, and monks themselves max out at 10 when they get extra unarmored movement, which is very specific and might not matter to you if you're multiclassing into anything that you want to use armor on. You can leave less points in them earlier, and I think level 7 and 6 are good levels to stop, but really they don't add any proficiencies if you're multiclassing into them. The most important thing that they add is their abilities themselves and the ability to use ki. I think monks function better as a main class and then adding something extra. Specifically, they work really well with assassins, and that's one of the builds that we're going to see later. But don't let me stop you. I would rate them fairly low as a class of you are starting in a different one and you multiclass into monk. The exception for me is talking about shadow monks, which are the ninjas, since they want to reach level 11 for Shadow Strike. Now, you can make a Shadow Monk with a Rogue Assassin as well. That's still a viable thing, and you don't need to reach level 11 for Shadow Strike, but I think that they fulfill that fantasy quite well, except for lacking Sneak Attack, which you can just get with 1 point in Rogue. Now, Paladins and Rangers, we're going to run into the problem of them being half-casters. The way that half-casters work is that they get access to spells and spell slots at half the rate of a normal caster. So that literally means that a level 6 paladin will have the same spell slots and spells available to them as a level 3 full caster. And if you added them to a ranger, for example, it wouldn't matter. They're both half casters, so they would continue to grow at that half rate. And if you mix them with a full caster, those spell slots would combine basically mathematically. So if you put 2 levels into Paladin, means you have 1 level of caster, and you put 2 levels into Cleric, that means you have 2 levels of caster from that. You would be level 4, and you would have the same spell slots as a level 3 caster. So those do add in that way, but you come up with the same problem that you have by combining full casters, which is the access to spells. Now, when it comes to Paladins in terms of multiclassing, you could argue that Paladins stop getting major value after level 5 when they obtain extra attack. Later on, they gain Aura of Protection, more Lay on Hands charges, Aura of Courage, and at the end, they get improved Divine Smite. They make a really good class for multiclassing up to level 5 as a base class if you really want to go for something very versatile. Since you're going to have spell slots, you're going to have versatility from the spells you have access to, but you're also going to have a lot of the benefits of a martial class, and then you can round that out or change it a little bit or specialize it more either in the martial or casting department by multiclassing into something else. As a baseline, what I'm saying is that reaching 5 on a paladin to get extra attack, having a lot of ability to smack things in the face, but then focusing on spells for the rest of it to have fairly high level spells aside from being quite competent in smacking in the face and having heavy armor on you. So you could go to a level 5 paladin, and then because we can see here in the stats that our strongest stat is charisma, we could then switch over to Bard because we're going to have stat level 15 on charisma. So Bard is still going to benefit quite a lot from that. When it comes to the actual subclasses, Devotion Paladins get Aura of Devotion at level 7 and Beacon of Hope and Remove Curse at 9. Beacon of Hope is incredibly useful. It's the one that makes it so that everybody gets the maximum healing possible from spells. So if you wanted to run your Paladin as a dedicated healer, I would actually argue that keeping them as a Paladin, at least until you get Beacon of Hope, would be really good. Ancients Paladins get 2 spells, but it's just protection from energy and added resistances to the elements, as well as plant growth, which just slows enemies in an area. And Vengeance Paladins similarly don't get much before 9, and at 9 they receive protection from energy and haste, which is very useful. Haste is very good. It allows you to cast 2 spells in the same turn, which is really, really strong, but it's a lot of investment to get there. Oathbreakers similarly get the debuff Bestow Curse and Animate Dead at level 9. In my opinion, isn't that useful that later on, when other classes obtain them much earlier, especially if you're looking to fulfill the Necromancer fantasy, I would just go Necromancer. So this means Paladins are actually fairly good if you want to go into multiclassing, and I think they're very common in D&D, the tabletop game, as multiclass options. They're strong upon themselves, they still get access to Lay on Hands, and they end up having so many different options. They are kind of truly the jack of all trades. Rangers, which are also half casters, they don't benefit from multiclassing with casters that much, just like Paladins, unless you really plan ahead for it. And leveling them up, they only get an extra natural explorer, a favorite enemy, and then they get hide in plain sight at level 10. They get Land Stride at 8, which allows them to ignore any difficult terrain. And like all martial classes, they get their extra attack at 5. Hunters really only get Volley and Whirlwind at level 11. So there's no harm in really multi-classing Hunters. Beastmasters get Bestial Fury, and that gives your companion an extra attack, and that's really strong, so it's a disincentive to multi-class if you're in a Beastmaster. If you specifically want the fantasy of being you and your pet, I wouldn't say Beastmaster is the ideal thing to multi-class. And Gloomstalkers have quite a few positives up to level 5, because their level 7 and level 9 aren't really great, and while Stalker's Flurry is great, that's their level 11 passive, which lets you attack again if you miss an attack, but you have to reach level 11, and that's really far along. So they're really good at multi-classing options, as well as the benefit of being half-casters if you're starting off with a class that has no casting, or if you wanted to add some of that martial element into a pure caster. I was on the wrong tab, but this is what you get. Rogues are really, really strong for multi-classing, because most of their strongest assets as a rogue come really early. They do get reliable talent at 11. That's something that allows them to never roll less than 10 on a skill they're proficient at. Really, they have so many advantages at level 1 to 3 that it's hard to justify pushing them further. So it's really good, unless you're fulfilling that rogue fantasy, to instead put the rogue as a multi-class into the class you're playing. So thieves especially only get Supreme Sneak at level 9, but at level 3 they get second story work that's reduced fall damage, and fast hands, which is an extra bonus action. And that's only 3 levels to get access to that, and the extra proficiencies of rogue. Assassins are amazing at level 3 because they gain Assassin's Alacrity, which allows you to refresh your actions on combat start. That means you can sneak up to an enemy, hit them from stealth, and then when the combat initiates after, you get a full turn. They also get Initiative Formation, which gives you advantage on creatures who haven't taken their turn yet, and Ambush, which makes all attacks against surprise creatures a critical hit. And these things stay no matter what main class you have, which is why something like the Monk-Rogue combination is so strong. Or if you have, I don't want to go too deep on spoilers, but if you have maybe some way of continuously triggering invisibility, going at least a little bit into Rogue is really, really good. Arcane Tricksters, though, are already kind of a hybrid class in themselves, so I would lean into multi-classing either Thief or Assassin, depending on what you're looking for, but Assassin is definitely one of the strongest things that you can multi-class in the game. Sorcerers use sorcerer points as well as having their spell slots as a normal caster, and all of the sorcerers obtain their most powerful abilities at level 11, but they don't really get much before that. So actually sorcerers up to level 5 or 6 are great options for building in magic with extra features right into a build. All of them, the things they obtain at level 11 are pretty good, but they're not the strongest thing in the world. So if you wanted to go into casting and you want to have things like meta magic, which are the passives that they get that use their sorcery points, these are all really cool and specific things that they have. Sorcerers actually work quite well for multi-classing because you don't need to pump them up that high since, like I said, it requires a very large jump between levels to reach all the way at level 11. Warlocks are actually one of the best and one of the worst to multi-class into. They have a really strong division, at least in my opinion, like most things in this video. See, they are really strong early with Eldritch Blast, and Eldritch Blast continues scaling as you level up as a cantrip. Quick edit in post in case you didn't know, all cantrips scale with level. It doesn't matter your Warlock level. You will get more Eldritch Blasts just by leveling up. That's what I mean here. And it's worth mentioning that the Warlock subclass is really not as important as the pact that you choose. Pact of the Chain is the one for pets, Pact of the Blade is the one for melee weapons, and both of those, which is what you obtain at level 3, can be really, really strong early on. So a lot of people choose to put those 3 levels into Warlock to have access to those really strong early game benefits that still scale pretty well into the late game. On the flip side, they are one of the classes that becomes the strongest after a horrendous mid-game. Their mid-game can be actually horrible. Truly, you just feel like you're very limited by the number of spell slots. You don't have spells that are that impactful. Your Eldritch Blast just doesn't do a lot of damage. It just feels very limiting unless you do something like spec using feats into becoming a tank, which is what I did during my leveling process with Will. But not only are they much better as you approach level 9, 10, and 11, specifically at level 9, they can take Minion of Chaos, which allows you to summon an elemental, which is amazing. Having pets that are also very strong in general, like the elementals, are very, very good. But then they also get access to level 6 spells that they can use with their Warlock spell slots. So you can just spam level 6 and level 5 spells with 3 Warlock spell slots that recoup on short rest. So they can just absolutely demolish combat once they reach that point. And if you specifically want to go Pact of the Blade, they have one of the strongest things to obtain at level 12, which, as you can see, no class really cares about reaching level 12, but when you reach level 12 on Warlock, you get access to Life Drinker, which is a passive that adds necrotic damage with your Charisma modifier on your melee attacks. So when you combine that with the double melee attack on Pact of the Blade, that's really good because you can open up combat, blast people with 3 level 5 or 6 spells, and once you run out of spell slots, you can just go to town with your melee attacks and destroy people. It's really, for me, a class that is excellent if left at level 3, or otherwise you kind of want to bump it to level 9, 10, 11, 12. This is in contrast to Rogue, by the way. I don't think that the Rogues obtain that many great things later on. They're very front-loaded, at least in the game, right? This is only up to level 12. Wizards, like casters in general, a lot of their strength is from obtaining those spell slots and getting to those higher tier spells, but their actual passive advantages stop at level 6, and they end completely at level 10 with the strong passives that they receive from their school. Those can be strong, so like Conjuration makes it so you don't break concentration from damage. Evocation lets you add your int modifier onto your damage spells. So there's a lot of powerful passives at level 10, but for me this is pretty mid, since like most casters except Sorcerer, which I do think has a lot of upsides early on, it's just not that impressive. It's just another option for becoming a caster. It will give you more spells, you will have more spells prepared, but remember that access to spells is gated by the level that you have in that class. So when everything is said and done, the best classes to just get some good passives out of with little investment are going to be Barbarian, Rogue, and Warlock. Classes that give you some decent benefits just from their versatility are going to be Bard, Cleric, and Wizard, with Sorcerer edging them out if you just want to go into some casting, because I think that the Sorcerer points on the meta magic are actually quite strong the more you develop them, so you can kind of play around with that. Paladins and Rangers are both pretty good to multi-class into, with the exception of Beastmaster. Paladins, like I said, very jack-of-all-tradesy. Druids, I think they're better as a specialization as going all in, but they do have flexibility, so they fall into the middle. Monks, I think, are really good as a base class that you then multi-class into. I do not think they're very good as something that you add levels into later. And finally, fighters are a decent starting point, but if what you really want is heavy armor and to get extra attack, since you're not going to take advantage of the level 11 double extra attack on fighter, I think it's better to start Paladin to get that flexibility that Paladin offers, that jack of all trades factor, or to go Cleric so that you have the full caster aspect while still having access to heavy armor, and then you can spec into something more along the lines of a martial, like a Barbarian, to get a little bit extra. So I think that rounds out more or less how you should categorize all of the classes in your head when you're considering multi-classing and getting all of those options. So more or less, that should cover everything that you need to know about multi-classing and get you well on your way. If you liked this video, make sure to like it. And if you want more content on Baldurs Gate 3, including an upcoming video I'm working on showing you my top 5 favorite multi-classes that I've made myself, make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss it. As always, I've been Mug Thief. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you on the internet.